Hello everybody, my name is M. I publish under the name M.R.X. Dentith, and I'm Associate Professor of Philosophy at Beijing Normal University at Zhuhai in the International Center for Philosophy. And I've been asked to give you a quick introduction to myself, my work, and the context of my work. So I'm a New Zealander by origin, and I undertook all of my undergraduate and graduate degrees at the University of Auckland, so my BA at the University of Auckland, my MA, which was in continental philosophy, at the University of Auckland, and my PhD in epistemology, which is the way I do it, a branch of analytic philosophy, also at the University of Auckland. I've worked both in New Zealand and in Romania, and now, of course, I'm working in China. And it's probably useful to talk a little bit about exactly how that came about. So, I undertook my master's and my PhD at the University of Auckland, whilst also being a sessional lecturer at the University of Auckland. So I was mostly teaching critical thinking or reason and argument style courses, whilst working on both my MA and my PhD. Post completion of my PhD, I of course entered into the wonderful world of trying to find an academic job. And let me tell you, finding academic jobs in the current academic market is quite difficult. So, whilst I would have had a preference to have stayed within New Zealand and continued working as a philosopher there, I did cast my net, so to speak, rather broadly, which meant that after about a year and a half of looking for postdoctoral opportunities, I ended up being offered a position at the University of Bucharest's Humanities Research Centre, the ECUB, to undertake a one-year postdoc in Bucharest in Romania, which I leapt at the chance to. I knew nothing about Romania or Romanian society before I left for Bucharest. By the time I finished my first year in Romania, I had fallen in love with the country. I kind of feel that Romania is like a second home. Whilst I'm not Romanian, I have a lot of sympathy towards Romanians and the way they see the world. And that's going to be important in just a minute, because my conceptual journey as a philosopher who specializes in the study of conspiracy theories has been influenced by the time I spent in and around Eastern Europe. Now, I undertook one postdoc at the University of Bucharest. I actually returned to Romania the next year to undertake a second postdoc at the New Europe College, which is a private educational institution also in Bucharest, where I was working on a continuation of my postdoc from the previous year. And spending time in Romania and spending time in the kind of political milieu that Romania represents compared to my home nation of Aotearoa, New Zealand, really was a fascinating experience. New Zealand is taken to be one of the most open and transparent Western-style democracies in the world. Often we're kind of level pegging with other countries in Scandinavia for how open and transparent our government is meant to be. The Romanian government is, depending on which measures you're looking at, either quite corrupt or only moderately corrupt. And as a consequence, whilst New Zealanders don't really think of conspiracy theories as being good explanations for events that occur within their society, Romanians do. Because Romanians have a lived history of conspiracy, not just under the communist period, under the dictator Ceausescu, but also in the modern period, where they have relatively corrupt governments that often say they're doing one thing whilst doing another thing. So New Zealanders often don't suspect that conspiracies are occurring, and thus New Zealanders downplay the motive role conspiracy theories might play in our politics. Romanians consider that it's very likely that when a government says something, they're probably lying to the people about at least some aspect of the governmental policy, at which point considering a conspiracy is a legitimate thing to do. And I guess that's an interesting factor here, because There's an awful lot of people in philosophy who work on conspiracy theory, and an awful lot of those people come from Australasia. So people like Charles Pigden down in Otago in New Zealand, myself from Auckland in New Zealand, David Cody, who's in Tasmania over in Australia, Steve Clark, who is in Melbourne in Australia, Patrick Stokes, who's also in Melbourne in Australia, Neil Levy, who I think is more Sydney side in Australia, along with Chris Fleming. There are an awful lot of philosophers who work on conspiracy theory from Australasia. And this is interesting because generally people in Australasia, both Australia and New Zealand, by and large think that their societies aren't particularly conspired, and thus conspiracy theories are unlikely to be warranted or unlikely to be plausible explanations. And yet the kind of philosophy that the Australasian philosophers of conspiracy theory have promoted is this thing called particularism. And particularism is the thesis that we cannot just dismiss conspiracy theories as a class of explanation. So we can't have a prima facie or general dismissal of these things called conspiracy theories. We can't assume they are all mad, bad, or dangerous beliefs. Rather, particularists argue that even if you think conspiracies are not common in your society, it is always possible that a conspiracy theory, when it's put forward, might well be a good explanation of an event. So, because we can't generalize about the class of things called conspiracy theories, we have to refer to the particular instances of those theories and appraise them on a case-by-case basis. So the particularist says, look, even if you don't think conspiracies occur commonly, we do know they have occurred, which means that when someone puts forward a theory about a new conspiracy, you need to consider it very carefully and go, what does the evidence say, rather than relying on a blanket or general dismissal of the theory simply because someone has labeled it as a conspiracy theory. So there's a really interesting aspect as to why Australasian philosophers of conspiracy theory, who live in a milieu where conspiracies seem quite rare in their political landscape, have ended up being really interested in the possibility that they might be rare, but they still occur, and thus we cannot subscribe to a blanket dismissal of these things labeled as conspiracy theories. So that's a really interesting aspect of kind of the conceptual journey. And whilst I was a particularist before I went to Romania, actually spending time in a non-Western nation like Romania made me keenly aware that one of the things which is missing from the discussion of conspiracy theories generally is the acknowledgement that different cultures and different nation states have different relationships when it comes to these things called conspiracy theories, often situated in the kind of cultural or political milieu that society exists in. Now, you're going to be looking at some of my work in the courses that you're doing, and even though I've given you this rather nice message introducing myself, giving you some context for why I believe the things I do, you shouldn't think that that means you should treat my work seriously such that you must believe it from the outset. Particularism has become kind of a default view in the philosophy of conspiracy theory, but it isn't unchallenged. There are a group of philosophers like Kassem Kossam, Keith Harris, M. Julian Napolitano, Kevin Rutter, who have all challenged the particularist consensus by saying, look, there may well be features of conspiracy theories that give us reason to suspect they're bad. Kossam, for example, thinks that conspiracy theories function as a form of political propaganda, and we shouldn't like political propaganda, so that's a reason to be dismissive of conspiracy theories. Keith Harris thinks that conspiracy theories often go against what experts believe, and that's a reason to be dismissive of them. M. Julian Napolitano thinks that conspiracy theories aren't even really theories per se, but are in fact actually instances of self-insulated beliefs. And Napolitano and Reuter, working together, have actually argued that even if particularists are right, that there's a class of conspiracy theory that we can't prima facie object to, this may not reflect the way that ordinary people talk about conspiracy theories. And maybe one of the issues we see in the philosophical literature is that often we are talking past how the people talk about conspiracy theories and only using a rarefied or academic sense of the label conspiracy theory. So I would recommend treat my work seriously, and it would be great if after you finish the course you think my work is the best work on the philosophy of conspiracy theories, but do be aware my work is challenged by other philosophers working in the field, and this is an active and vibrant field of academic research. Numerous special issues on conspiracy theories have come out in the past few years. There are more special issues and edited collections to come out next year and the years beyond. There is still a lot of work to do. And maybe, as you're researching conspiracy theories, you may find something that philosophers haven't yet honed their sights upon, and you may well be in the position I am in 5 to 10 years' time, where you're addressing a class explaining how you got into conspiracy theories and why your work is on the cutting edge of this really fascinating field. Enjoy your course.